Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. All right, friends, so we've gathered for the full moon, and this is an auspicious day to gather. As the Buddha said, any day when we gather and share and practice Dhamma is an auspicious day. We should not wait for particular days of the calendar to arise, but we should jump on any opportunity to practice. Any day or any night could be auspicious. But nevertheless, we've chosen this day and we've come together. And this morning, I had a particularly unauspicious omen. I tested positive for COVID this morning, and it's not a surprise at all. The other members of the household where I'm staying have kind of been getting sick and testing positive, so it was just a matter of time. Well, the question arose as we're nicely locked down, and our friends of the local community have been dropping stuff off for us and looking in on us, and we were all vaccinated. So it's passing quite quickly, though it is still very unpleasant for the brief time it's here. But the question arose how to deal with it, how to regard this. Like, what's the Buddhist angle on COVID? And so this is very interesting, when you stop and think about it, because as a rule in Buddhism, we don't prefer truths that are only applicable in certain circumstances. So the right way to relate to COVID shouldn't be different before we get COVID from when we get COVID, from when we've gotten over COVID. It should be the same relationship all the way through. And this is the definition of satcha, truth, in Buddhism. Those things which are worthy, noble truths, and those things which are always true. So what is the perspective for a sickness that is applicable whether or not we're sick? And as it turns out, the Buddha is actually quite explicit about how to regard sickness. And to know this, one would have to have heard about something called the four duties. And the four duties are something that are mentioned in relation to the Four Noble Truths. And this happens, it's a structure that comes out in the first recorded teaching of the Buddha, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, in which the Buddha lays out the Four Noble Truths. At the same time, he lays out the four duties. Each noble truth is not simply like, okay, that's true. Once you realize that, you're good. Each noble truth has a duty, a relationship that you have to cultivate towards that noble truth. This is what constitutes waking up to the Four Noble Truths. Understanding the Four Noble Truths is not simply this initial knowledge. There are these Four Noble Truths. But at the moment that arises, next it should arise, there's this relationship I have to cultivate. Finally, the Buddha said, there arose a knowledge that he had cultivated successfully the duties to each of the Noble Truths. And he said, until he had realized the Four Noble Truths and cultivated the duty to each Noble Truth. So Four Noble Truths, through these three aspects, the truth, the duty, and the completion. Until he had gotten that, he wasn't fully enlightened. So he equates this to actual enlightenment, seeing the noble truth and cultivating the duty. So with this structure, the four duties, we can know how to relate to anything that arises. And this is the basis of skillful contemplation of dhammas in terms of developing mindfulness and wisdom. So the Four Noble Truths are obviously dukkha, or suffering, samudaya, the origin of suffering, nirodha, the non-arising of suffering, and magga, the path to the non-arising of suffering. The four duties to dukkha, there is the duty of parinyaya. Dukkha must be understood. And this is a word that means pari, which is the same prefix that we find in words like perimeter or periscope. It means all around. And nya, which means to know. So to completely know all around from all angles. This is what we have to do for dukkha. The origin of dukkha, the cause of dukkha, that is craving, is to be abandoned, vahatava. The non-arising of dukkha, sometimes translated as the cessation of dukkha, but it deals specifically with the removal of the cause, the removal of the reason dukkha arises. That is to be realized. It is to be seen for oneself. It is to be woken up to. And finally, the magga, the path, is to be bhavana, is to be cultivated. These are the four duties to the Four Noble Truths. So when we step back and when something comes up in life, say we get sick, or say somebody gets married, or say our car breaks down, or say we really want a new iPhone, we could stop and we could say, like, what am I supposed to do in this situation? Now, there is conventional wisdom. There's like, oh, I should probably do this or do that, or I shouldn't think that, or this is very indulgent of me, or this is very callous of me. Maybe I should be more compassionate. We can have all sorts of thoughts, and we can sometimes spin ourselves out as to these thoughts. Like, as we're trying to figure out, like, where did this sickness enter the household? Who was the first person? How did it spread? We really can't. Because we all kind of got it at the same time, but staggered by little increments of time. So the only possible vector is the cat. So only one we interacted with, at strange bits of time. And it probably wasn't the cat, because the cat hasn't been out socializing with anybody outside of our circle. So what do? We just don't know. Yeah. What is the conventional wisdom? There's all sorts of conventional wisdoms. Open the windows, close the windows, wear a mask, don't wear a mask, completely isolate. And you can go somewhere, but have a mask on. Take this herb, take that herb. All sorts of conventional wisdoms. But if we stop and we say, well, where would this be in the Four Noble Truths? Then we will know what relationship we should develop towards this thing. So say we want a new iPhone, we'd be like, okay, well, it's craving. So that's the second noble truth. This is to be abandoned. This craving for the iPhone is to be abandoned. And so we just look, and it's like, this particular thing is not as good as my mind is telling me it is. It's very expensive. It's liable to break. Eventually, that craving for it is abandoned, and we see the thing just as it is. And say there's something like a relationship. We're thinking about getting into a relationship, and you're like, well, what will this affect the most? And we say, well, it would. And it's not mentioned there in the first noble truth, by the way. Is it doesn't say relationships are dukkha, so you don't have to worry about that one. But it would affect our lifestyle, right? It would affect how we'd be able to practice, how we'd be able to cultivate things. The need to work and make a livelihood would be affected if we were in a relationship or we had a family of our own. And so we'd look at the fourth noble truth and be like, how could I cultivate the fourth noble truth in relationship to this relationship? How can it be based on right intention and right speech and right action? And how could it not take me into wrong friendships and wrong livelihoods and take me away from the path? And then when it comes to sickness, this does fall squarely within the first noble truth. And so the first noble truth is, the duty to this is to understand it, to know it completely. And this is why I say we are trying to find a truth or a relationship that is the same no matter what the circumstance. So in terms of sickness, we're not supposed to abandon sickness. We're not supposed to work for the non-arising of sickness. We're not even supposed to cultivate sickness, like become the ultimate healthy person or the ultimately noble sick person. There are some religions that do that. You like beat yourself and starve yourself and you become like the ultimate sick person. But no, we are meant to understand sickness. The method that the Buddha suggests is to continually reflect. And he gives the 5 recollections, which is directly targeted at this first noble truth. He says, I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. I am the nature to sicken. I have not gone beyond sickness. I am the nature to die. I have not gone beyond dying. Everything that is mine, beloved, and pleasing will become otherwise, will become separated. And I am the owner of my karma, born of my karma, heir to my karma, related to my karma, abide supported by my karma. Whatever actions I shall do for good or for ill, of that I will be the heirs. And the Buddha said this is, and he didn't say just for monks. He said this is something people should recite over and over again. This is something to be continuously recollected. This is how we develop an understanding. And this is our only duty in terms of aging, birth, aging, sickness, death, loss, grief, anything that befalls us based on our actions and the consequences of those actions. And as it turns out, the cause for sickness is not necessarily because a window was open, or not necessarily because we didn't take a particular vitamin. And sometimes have an effect, but sometimes it's simply karmic. Sometimes there's not much we can do, sort of like everybody in the household got it, regardless of their diet, regardless of, whether or not they're vaccinated, regardless of who they're interacting with, regardless of their lung capacity. It's just like we just all got it. So some things are just like that, they just happen. So to really fully know, to fully understand in a comprehensive way this suffering of which we're a part, we have to be willing to experience it. And we have to be willing to accept that it is our nature, and that it is always our nature, and that this nature was conditioned by birth. So we don't have to question whether or not we will get sick. The Buddha just looked out at all the people and he said, were you born? And everybody raises their hand. He's like, you are of the nature to get sick. But the human bodies get sick. You say that's bad news, but actually, in Buddhist terms, that's good news. Because that means when you do get sick, it doesn't mean something is wrong. It actually is to be expected. It means that things are following their nature. And that doesn't mean that to get sick is more natural than to be healthy. It's just that it is our nature to be either. Yeah. We're of the nature to move through these states during the course of our life. So what is the right relationship to a disease? Well, it's to understand that it can befall us. And when it does, we're going to need to adapt and deal with it. And we might feel awful, and we might want to just rest or recuperate. And all of these can be skillful responses, and they come from a sense of being part of something, getting in the middle of something so we can look all around us and see what it's like. Now, for somebody who's not sick, the way that they can come to know sickness is to contemplate it, because they probably have been sick sometime in their life. They can think about what that was like back then, all of the emotions that came up, all of the interactions that came up around it. Or they can look at people in their lives who are sick and be like, well, what's my relationship with them at this time? Is compassion arising? Is patience arising? Is acceptance arising? Or am I getting impatient? Do I think they're faking it? Do I think they should just move on? Do I think they're whining? All of these things can help us come to know ourselves and come to know our basic nature, which is what the Noble Truths are meant to show us. What this construction really is. Not what we're told it is, not what we grow up thinking it is, not what conventional wisdom tells us it is, but what it actually is. And that means we have to be willing to look at what's actually here. even when we're sick. And that's not to say that when we're awful sick and we're miserable and we've got a headache and we're coughing, that we have to meditate. We have to get up and we have to soldier on through. And it's like, that's not necessarily understanding it. There are times when we're just not going to be up for intense formal practice. But even if we're flat on our back, we don't have to regret or begrudge or resist that experience. I had quite a vivid experience of this recently. A member of the household, their mother was passing away and she was in hospice, and they were able to bring her here in the last hours of her life. And as she neared the point of death, she developed what nurses call the death rattle, which is a kind of phlegmy, abnormal rhythm of the lungs, because they're not inflating properly anymore. The whole mechanism isn't working. And it was very interesting. This woman, I must say, even though she wasn't a very intensive meditator, she had some good karma in that she was surrounded by meditators as she passed away. But we were all there breathing normally, but we got to contemplate her abnormal breathing. And it was funny because as we sat there and we listened to this, the lungs, working in an abnormal manner and this kind of raspy thing that viscerally our bodies said, this is wrong. Something's wrong. Why can't she just breathe normally? Nevertheless, there was this beauty to it in that all of us were able to kind of let that go. And because we could sense that she was letting it go. She had already let go of the body and she passed quite peacefully. The breathing just slowed and slowed and then stopped. And then there was this incredible silence afterwards, where her children were there holding her hands. And that whole thing was just an example of what it's like when we don't resist. Even when something is going wrong, we don't try to get rid of it. We don't try to prevent things from going wrong. We don't try to cultivate right or cultivate wrong, but we accept, like, this is the way things are happening, for better or for worse. This is what's going on, be it a fever, be it a death rattle, be it a cough, be it sniffles, whatever's going on, that's what's going on right now. No manner of wishing will cause it not to be so. This is actually the Buddha explains how we can know that not self is a characteristic of things. We can wish, may I not be sick, but we will not therefore not be sick. We can wish it, but it won't make it true. If we were in control of any part of this construction, we'd be able to say, no, you're going to be like that, you're not going to be like that. But we can't. Not for any cell in the body can we intentionally say, you will not experience change, you will not experience unpleasantness. You are completely subject to my will. We can't do it. So then we even have to ask the question, like, why have a will if it can't control anything? Well, this is the $1 million question. Why do we have this ego, this will, if it's not actually in control of anything? Well, it's a good question. Wouldn't you kind of get rid of it if it was useless and causing you suffering? I think that might be in fact the prescription. And it's to be understood. It is to be let go of. It is to be brought to cessation. And the way out, the way past this ego, is to be cultivated. Yeah. In its entirety. So that's what I got. And now I would like to say sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you for joining. And if anybody has any questions or clarifications they'd want, feel free to ask.
I hope you feel better soon, Bhante. So I just said, I hope you feel better soon, Bhante.
Oh yeah. It is what it is. Actually, when it comes to being sick, I'm something of a veteran. Okay. Well, then I think we will call this happy full moon.